What's the best way you've seen someone get fired or quit? I used to work at an extremely busy Jimmy John's. We had this new guy and he was still learning how to work on the line. During a particularly busy lunch rush, he was stationed on the same line as our GM and another veteran employee who was a total Karen to him. The Karen girl was getting really frustrated with how slow he was the whole rush and making a lot of rude comments to him. At first, he just gave her a little crap back and then got back to work. About halfway through the rush, and she says something to the effect of, "We could go faster without you." This guy extremely calmly takes off his apron, folds it nicely, sets it on the cutting boards, grabs the mayo spatula, sprays the lady's face with a huge glob of mayo, walks over to the pose, clocks out, pushes through the customers in line, and walks out the front door, never to be seen again. 10:10. Exit. Didn't say a word the whole time, and the restaurant froze for about 30 seconds while it was happening. Story 2. Personal story here. Worked at Sears back during my undergrad years, trying to earn enough money to finish up undergrad. Sold shoes on commission, between 7% and 10% of sales depending on the type of shoe, and was making pretty good money, 25 hour, by busting my ass. They were always trying to screw us in little ways, lowering the commission rate on certain shoes without telling us, forcing us to stay after closing, unpaid, to clean up, etc. But I was earning enough to put up with it. Then, right before back-to-school season, one of the busiest times of the year, they announced that instead of our 7%, 10% commission rate, they were going to switch us over to minimum wage plus percent commission. I was distinctly not thrilled by this news and made my displeasure known, but we had two options: accept it or quit. Store manager sits me down asking me to stay because I'm his top seller and do a ton of extra work to keep things running smoothly, saying that I'll still make good money through back-to-school season. I heard him out, asked for a pen and paper, and then did some math. Under the new pay system, if I had my best sales day ever every day, I'd still be making 40%, 50% less than I did on an average day under the old commission system. I looked the store manager in the eye and asked if he'd stay if they cut his pay 50%. He said he wouldn't. I stood up, shook his hand, let him know that I appreciated him talking things out with me and that I understood it wasn't his decision, and gave my notice. Story 3. Working at a car dealership. There was this salesman, 60-ish, nice enough guy, but something just seemed off about him. Good employee, always showed up on time, did his job, kept his sales numbers decent, never gave management anything to complain about. One day he went up to the manager's desk and asked if he could leave for a while, said he had a doctor's appointment and he mistakenly wrote it in his planner for the next week, but it was actually that day. He wasn't the type to pull attendance shenanigans, so sure, the manager let him go. 15 minutes later, a bounty hunter showed up looking for him. The guy was carrying a full set of shackles cuffs, leg iron, the whole 9 yards, accompanied by a state trooper. We told him the dude he was looking for claimed he had a doctor's appointment and had just split. He left a business card in case we heard anything and then left. Salesman who took off was driving one of our used cars from the lot when he left. We never heard from him again. We reported the car stolen. 5 days later, we got a call from the state police in the next state over. They found our car abandoned in a Walmart parking lot, undamaged, with the keys in the ignition. We never did hear from that guy again, and to this day, I can't find any arrest records or details about him. I figure he was using a stolen identity, and that is the best way I've seen someone quit a job. Story 4. Very religious dude went on a massive rant to me in the office. Being gay is a sin. Everything you do is a sin and you're going to hell. You're an abomination, things like that. Well, it turned out my manager, who happened to practice that exact same religion, was directly behind me and stood up, shouted, "Get the duck out," and frog marched him to the security booth and fired him there and then. Manager came back and said, "Sorry about that, we're not all bananas. That was about 7 years ago. A year ago, I started working in a new office for a different company. And guess who was there? That's right, him. I tried to avoid him, for obvious reasons. But one day he clocked me and said, 'I used to work with you, didn't I? Back at A, right?' Yeah, we did. Those guys were a holes. They fired me for no good reason. Actually, they fired you because you made horrifically homophobic remarks to me." He turned white as a sheet and walked away. He quit a few days later. Story 5 was in a Starbucks. Some lady complained about her frap. The guy just said, "I had enough of your crap. It's been over a year, and every time we remake your frap," and he grabbed it, threw it at her feet, and just walked off. Story 6. In high school, I worked at a movie theater, and a guy I went to school with also worked there. One day, he was let go from his seasonal position after having been told he'd be staying on permanently by the GM. He got really upset in the middle of the main lobby, threw his hands up in the air, screamed, "This is horse crap," and walked over to the candy jars, where people would make these self-serve candy by the pounds bags. He opened up the jar with gummy worms, put a couple of fists full into his pockets, and stormed out while throwing his bow tie into the air. Story 7. Walked into a Jimmy John, and all the employees were dancing on tables and the counters to very loud metal. Manager walked in pissed out of her mind and fired the shift leader, I think, on the spot. I just stood there, watching for probably 5 minutes. Don't even remember if I ordered anything. Weird story I don't think about often. Story 8. Worked in a burger and wing bar in college. If you were good with the kitchen staff, you could get pretty much anything you could imagine for dinner for the cost of the cheapest thing on the menu. Had to ring in something at 50% to keep the boss happy. So it was normal for servers to come in with crazy ideas, and we'd make them. I was kitchen staff. Anyways, I was working a slow day, and one of the bartenders brings me a pitcher of beer and a request for dinner. Bribes always work, and it's not like he was paying for the beer anyway. It was like a double burger with a steak quesadilla for a bun, triple bacon, onion rings, and some other crazy toppings. Weird part was the sauce. He wanted the entire thing covered in the special house-get sauce, like poured over the complete burger. I laugh, accept my beer bribe, and make 2. Hey, I'm hungry too. So I plate them, tell the other kitchen guys I'm taking my dinner break, and bring them out. I sit down and start eating. Bartender takes his massive burger and throws it at the restaurant manager and says, "I quit," then downs a shot and walks out. The sauce-covered quesadilla burger was ducking amazing, but the evil glare from the head boss while I was trying to eat a copy of what had just been thrown at him was making it hard to finish. But I did. It was a great ducking burger. To this day, I still have no idea why he didn't just... Story 9. I didn't witness it firsthand, but it's the ducking dumbest out of a sitcom crap I've ever heard of. Coworker gets wind that his boss is unhappy with him and he might be fired soon. Builds up his confidence and goes into the boss's office to straighten everything out. I guess he lost his composure because the talk quickly deteriorated from adult conversation to duck you, you're a ducking, I hate you, everyone hates you, duck you, I'm out. The boss asks what brought this on. You were going to fire me. I was? You weren't. No. I see. Well, can I stay then? No. Story 10. I can tell you the worst way I've experienced. My boss asked me to get a file off of my coworker's computer. I was unable to retrieve the file because of the piles and piles of adult film she had saved throughout her computer, including photos she took of herself in the office bathroom. Those scarred me. I still haven't recovered. I basically told my boss I think he had better look for the file himself and see if he has any better luck. All I hear from her cubicle is his horrified shouts. No, oh, not that. Is that my bathroom? Needless to say, she didn't have a fun meeting with him when she got back from lunch. Story 11. I used to work at a McDonald's. I was there for 4 years as a manager working at an owner-operator system, not corporate. Thanksgiving morning, we were open for breakfast only and began closing around 10:30 a.m., usual breakfast end time. One of my fellow managers left her phone out by the drive-through runner station. Now, since it was a holiday and we were closing early, lots of crew were acting out and having fun, which our owner encouraged as long as we were still being professional, appropriate, and serving guests first. One of the crew members grabbed the phone, and unfortunately, the dot station was not covered in any of the camera's views, so we didn't catch the culprit. We chalked it up to a git named Keith, but couldn't actually prove anything. Fast forward a few months, and Keith is having bowel issues. As the shift manager, I keep having to find someone to cover him because it seems like every 20 or so minutes, he runs to the restroom for at least 10 minutes. After an hour and 3 bathroom trips, I'm ready to send this guy home. I go back to the office where my support managers are. One is the owner's son, the other is the manager who lost her phone, and the third is actually the shift manager for breakfast. And let them know. It feels like simultaneously they all yell at me not to let him leave. Okay, strange. The owner's son has been on the phone all morning with my support, the one who lost her phone, in the office with him. Turns out they have the phone company on the line and are trying to find out who has been using it. I'm absolutely, completely unsure how they found out, but Keith did take the phone and has been using it ever since. Now, this git hasn't used the bathroom in about 30 minutes and is begging me to let him go. I tell him that I need to get some people back from break before I have a replacement for him. A few minutes later, max of 5 minutes, I get another crew member to cover for him. Keith runs to the bathroom and is in there for 10 minutes again. He waddles up to me, absolutely reeking of wetsuit, and tells me that he didn't make it in time. I can't let this guy walk around in crap, let alone where we make food, so I send him home, shuffling his way to the back to grab his stuff from the crew room. The owner's son and my support manager call him into the office. Accusing Keith of stealing the manager's phone, the owner's son fires him. This guy was just fired from a McDonald's right after he hit himself. Story 12. A coworker went on a rant at my manager in front of customers, shouted at her and called her a cupcake, Jabba the Hutt, looking mother ducker. He then was promptly fired and left. Story 13. I was working for my dad about 10 years ago, and my best friend was working at this pizza place that treated him like crap. So my friend asks my father for a job, but my father tells him he will only give him a job if he goes into the pizza place and tells the manager he is an a-hole. I went with him to confirm. It was hilarious, and I worked with him for about a year after that. Story 14. I don't really think this is the best way, but it is one of the more memorable ones. Years ago, when I worked at Disneyland, the night crew of one of the roller coasters decided to take a last ride after the park closed. They went out without the lap bars down, and one of the track turns is close to a walkway where they were visible. A park security guard saw them all standing up in the train and called Theme Park 1, the park manager on duty that night, to report it. A day or two later, everyone on the crew, including the lead who dispatched the train without the lap bars down, was fired. The union couldn't do anything to help them because they all clearly violated safety protocol. One team member ultimately got his job back because records proved he had gone home early that night and was off property when the incident happened. He wasn't allowed to go back to that ride, but he didn't care because he was a river guy anyway. Damn good guy too, so I was happy he got his job back. In case anyone wonders, this was in the 1990s, and after closing rides and such were common, provided we weren't being unsafe. On some rides, we'd have to tag out, take a tag to indicate we were somewhere inside the ride, and it was unsafe to operate at the moment. But as long as a lead, manager, or someone from maintenance knew we were there, things were fine. I have a lot of pictures from the times I went through the rides after closing. Such fun memories. Now, with all of the safety concerns, I doubt it would ever be allowed. Story 15. So we had a dude who kept showing up to work stoned as duck every single shift. This dude was not smart at all and was trying to hide it despite being textbook stoned, laughing randomly, red eyes, looking like a ducking space cadet. It wouldn't normally be a problem because if we can't notice it, we don't substances test, so who cares? But this dude just wasn't doing his job at all. My boss decided he was going to try and use scare tactics to get him to stop coming to work stoned. Or he was trying to get him to admit it so we could fire him on the spot. My boss was not a serious guy and was really just doing it to see what the kid would say. He brought him into his office with a witness present, sat him down and began gazing intently at him over the desk. The kid starts sweating bullets. Then he leans across the desk and says, "Are you high?" The kid immediately starts babbling that no way, he's not high. My boss cut him off and yelled, "You're a liar." Then follows up with, "If you show up to work again high, you're fired. No, get out of my office." The kid scurries away like a puppy with his tail between his legs. Raucous laughter ensues. The kid stopped showing up after that and was fired anyway. Story 16. A mid-sized company where I worked had started out small, just about 15 employees on site, and another 20 or so in a recently acquired location in another state. When I started, policies were pretty lax. Vacation time was plentiful. Perks were arranged. The CFO would steal the skateboard out from under my desk and skate through the office. After about a year, policies tightened up. Skateboarding in the office was a no-no by anyone, even the CFO. Vacation time was cut. We acquired another company. We remodeled the office. A couple years after that, we moved to a bigger office, and a year or so later, the not-so-small company was purchased in June or July by a much larger company. By that November, the new management was scheduling all employees for either group meetings or individual meetings with the new directors. And by then, we all knew what was coming. If you were scheduled for an individual meeting, you'd better have your desk packed up ahead of time. If you were scheduled for a group meeting, you were in for God only knows how much misery while processes changed, management changed, rules and policies changed. Again, the week these meetings were being scheduled, I was in the process of moving closer to the office, into an apartment with one of my coworkers. I'd taken a night job near the office, but that meant I didn't get home till after midnight, or to bed until 1 a.m., and was back up at 5 a.m. to make it to work by 8:30 a.m. I had to leave the house before 6 just to make it on time. I'd begun to pack my desk on a Friday, the day they scheduled my individual meeting. My coworker asked, "Are you still planning to move in?" He too was scheduled for an individual meeting, half an hour after mine. When I got to work on Monday, several of my coworkers were walking out, boxes in hand. We hugged and promised to stay in touch. When I got to my desk, I packed the last few of my belongings with my boss next to me, telling me, "You don't know what's going to happen. Why don't you log in and do some work?" I scoffed and waited for my appointment. The skateboarding CFO poked his head around my desk and waited for me to stand up. "Hi, woman. How are you?" He looked hangdog and sounded genuinely sad. His whole day was going to be people yelling at him, begging him, crying. I looked him in the eye, grinned at him, and said cheerily, "Well, CFO, I gotta tell you, this is the best day of my life." The CFO looked shocked, but crap. 5 years of working for no respect and no appreciation, and I get to go home at 9:30 a.m. with 3 whole months of pay? Yeah, you bet. That was the best day of my life. The last thing I put in my box was my skateboard. Story 17. I used to work at a pizza shop, and delivery drivers were always coming going. Anyways, one day we had a driver named Ivan who was a bullcrap artist and very lazy during the notoriously busy Friday night shift. Ivan leaves with about $100 worth of food and is gone for a while. Orders start stacking up and people are looking for their deliveries. Manager calls Ivan to see where he is, and Ivan replies he decided to take the food to a friend's house and wouldn't be coming back. He stated that the crafty food and cash he had would be sufficient enough compensation. Manager calls owner, who ducking hits the roof, came in and had murder in his eye. About a week later, Ivan shows up wanting his job back. Almost saw murder that day. Story 18. Our production manager brought in a 12-pack of Natty Boh and slammed all of them as quick as he could right on the production floor. He said he quits and walks out the door. I wasn't even sure if he was drunk yet. It was incredible to watch. Story 19. So the summer after I graduated from high school, I worked at a pretzel maker at the local mall. It was a pretty cool job, got free pretzels whenever I wanted and got to go shopping before work, after and on breaks if I felt like it. So anyways, the only downside was that I had to work with crafty kids who were still in school and only cared about high school and drama and blah blah blah. And I was always the kind of person to avoid such annoyances and unnecessary drama, mostly due to the fact that my family caused plenty of that crap already. But to the point, out of all these annoying kids I worked with, there was one guy in particular that would not leave me alone. He was a junior in high school, typical duck boy type who vaped, smoked, did substances, drank. He was quite the troublemaker. I honestly don't know how he managed to keep that job for however many years that he did. So he would do the typical immature things you'd expect from a schoolyard bully. He'd make fun of me, throw raw dough at me. He even threw a knife at me at one point. Now, he was a banana head to everybody, but he was especially bananish to me. I would always let my supervisors and the manager know whenever serious things happened. I would even ask to be scheduled on days that he didn't work so I could keep the job and stay safe. And then he was put up for the position of being a new supervisor, and he got it in a heartbeat. So now he had even more power. He started showing up late, or not showing up at all. He got into a couple car accidents and a few fights. He would blast Eminem on the speaker in our store and scream the lyrics at me and my coworkers. He pushed and pushed to get reactions out of people. He made a lot of the girls at work cry. He tested the limits so far that I thought it would never stop. I had been looking for other jobs, but there was no place that would hire me, despite my efforts to look like the best employee in the world. I had no choice. I had to bear with it and hope that maybe someday our manager would grow some tits and fire this a hole. The tension just kept building and building. So many of us reported him so many times for being rude and inappropriate and threatening. And then the most satisfying workday of my life finally came. The manager had finally has enough, and when the banana hole tried to fake sick to not have to come in, she fired him over the phone right then and there. Sure, there could have been a more vengeful or justice-fueled way to fire him, especially if it wouldn't have taken way longer than it should have. But for me anyway, I felt a whole lot safer after he got fired. Story 20. Personal experience, also female. Intended misleading handle. I worked a couple months as a bartender at a local joint that was very popular. The creepy male owner hired me on the spot and handed me papers that stated that the dress code was skin, skin, skin. Heels with a minimum of 3 inches had to be worn for every 8-hour shift, which you wouldn't think is too bad until you're walking around this huge bar serving people, stocking cases of beer, and completely spot cleaning the entire bar every night. Skirts and shorts only with low-cut shirts. I'm typically the conservative type, so I didn't intend on going back, but before I left, I conversed with one of the bartenders and she told me she made nearly $200 a night on top of the hourly $10 pay. Because of it, and I really needed funds, I gave it a shot. First day, I wore a shirt with no cleavage showing. She cut my shirt, didn't even ask, just grabbed some scissors, walked toward me, asking if I'd read the dress code. When she asked if I wanted to work or go home, grabbed my shirt and snip. I was too startled to even react at this point. The money was just as great as I was told, but the majority of the guests were huge perverts. And the manager never backed the bartender, only his customers. Even if they got handsy, he sat on one corner of the bar every day, got crap-faced, and made degrading comments whenever you were near him. So I did multiple absolute best to avoid him. His wife was a huge Karen and measured the liquor count every night, making us pay for any shortages out of pocket, even if pourers were faulty. One night, I was getting supplies from the storage room and the husband stumbled in, locking the door behind him. "Where are you going to run to now?" he asked with his bulging boner and his Speedo. He wore this in a tank top when we were closing and his wife went home early. I told him that if he didn't move out of the way, I was going to puncture a hole in his wrinkled ass balls with my stilettos. He threatened to fire me and I told him he'd be doing me a favor. He started laughing and let me pass, saying I should lighten up. I went to work the next day with the intention of walking out, spoke with the other 3 bartenders on shift, telling them what happened, and they shared equally disturbing stories. We all decided to wait until peak time and walk out at the same time without a word on a Saturday night during a huge event, and we did just that. I later found out that he was a registered offender and had over 20 counts of harassment charges, but his brother was a lawyer and his family had government ties. Story 21. I work at a construction company, so manly men, etc. This happened in the late 90s. One of our workers, Joe, came into the office to speak to the owner. Joe had been around for a little while. He was still an apprentice, but was very thorough, so the owner was planning to work with him to get him up to foreman level. Anyway, Joe had come in to complain about his foreman, Bill. Nobody liked Bill, but he was a little skinny guy, so nobody really paid too much attention to him. So Joe said that Bill was calling him names. What kind of name? Big baby. Okay, Joe goes on to say how horrible this is and makes him feel bad. The owner says he'll talk to Bill and have him quit name calling. Joe got more and more upset, raising his voice. And the final thing he said as he left was, "How would you like it if he called you a big baby? You big baby." I had my head on my desk laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. Joe never came back. He missed out on a great opportunity because somebody called him a big baby. Not as dramatic as some of these, but really funny at the time. Story 22. I worked at a food production facility for about 2 years. 6 weeks after hire, I got to interview and was promoted for a shift manager position. In the interview, when they asked what my plans for the future were, I told them I would eventually like to do the job right above the one I was interviewing for and the one right above that. In the interview, it was agreed that they would set a career path for me to get there. Over the course of the next year and a half, I outshined the other 5 people in my position, did extra work, was trained on inventory, interviewing, employee reviews, all the stuff the position above mine would entail. When one of the positions above mine opened, I applied and interviewed for it, ultimately not landing the position, which was fine. About 4 months later, they were hiring for the manager of the production floor and had 2 guys interviewing for the position. Now we had just gotten a new HR manager in the meantime. One of the managers in the position above mine ended up being promoted to that management position. Since he was promoted, and another manager left, there were 2 open jobs for the position I had previously applied and was more than qualified for, wording by talks with 3 separate managers. HR ended up hiring the 2 guys from outside the company that were applying for the top manager position. The jobs were never posted. Thusly, I never got to interview, let alone apply for them. The newly appointed top manager, who was previously my manager, came up shortly after and basically said that he knew I was qualified. He was sorry, and he had no control over the situation. Yeah, right, he got his and I didn't. I told management that I wanted to demote myself, which was not without precedent, as a coworker had done so about a year before. I got pulled into a meeting with HR and the newly promoted manager, and the situation was laid bare. I could wait 5 weeks for some attendance points to fall off so I could apply for the demotion. This policy was enforced only when they felt like it, and there would be no guarantee a position would be open in those 5 weeks. I told them, "Okay, I'm done." The newly promoted manager said, "In 2 weeks?" And I replied, "No, right now." Started signing papers and collected my final check, which, written by the new HR manager, didn't even have the right date on it by 2 months. Story 23. Well, it was me on my last day, but I was 16, 17 working at McDonald's on the front counter. Anyway, it was Big Macs for $1 and we were a store in a mall, so busy. This guy comes back with an order he'd received. He threw down 3 empty Big Mac boxes and a half-eaten Big Mac. He screamed at me, "These had pickles." I asked for no pickles. I'm allergic. I looked and noticed the half-eaten one had Big Mac sauce on it. I proceeded to pick it up, throw it at his face, and yell, "The Big Mac has pickles in it, hamburglar," and walked off the job. 10-10 would do again. Story 24. My dad owned his own chiropractic clinic, small family business with his brother and father. To give me and my sisters a start in the working world, he hired each of us when we were 15 to work the front desk part-time around school. We made appointment, checked in patients, did some insurance billing, etc. My older sister worked for him for a year. She did well. I worked for him for 2 years. It was a good job, and it was nice having lunch with Dad so often during summer and on school holidays. Younger sister was hired in as I was getting ready to leave for another job, so I was training her. I told her, "Look, the number 1 rule is at the office, he is not Dad. He is the boss and the doctor, so treat him like that in front of patients." 2 days in, a patient was at the front desk chatting with my father. He turned to my younger sister to ask her to do something, and she snapped in her best girl, whose dad is too stupid to live a voice. "In a minute, I'm busy. God!" He fired her on the spot, right in front of me and the patient. She couldn't believe it. I had to grab her purse and drag her out to the parking lot so her meltdown didn't happen in front of the patient. She went home and raged to Mom. Mom told her at least Dad would be nice and pay her for the 1.5 days she managed to stay employed. Story 25. This was a long time ago. I was working at a firm, and my boss was this black English lady who kept losing people because she had no people skills and was mean for the sake of being mean. She kept harping on me all the time about what I was doing and would insinuate I wasn't working or working enough all the time. I complained about her to HR once, and they talked to her, and she stopped for a couple weeks, then went back to being her normal self. I was barely hanging on that job by a thread because I couldn't take the constant harping and yelling at me. She was very hated in that firm, and they should have gotten rid of her a long time before. Finally, we're having a meeting in the main conference room, me, her, and her assistant. She starts in on the insinuating, I'm not doing any work and she's just being a Karen for the sake of being mean again. And I snap. I say, the weird thing is, as I get up and start heading for the door because I want everyone in the firm to hear, why you haven't fired me already? I open the door and start yelling, because clearly I'm the worst employee ever and don't do anything. At this point, she realizes she's about to get in trouble if I leave, and she was scared and says, okay, let's talk about this. But it was too late. I walk into the hall and toward the HR office, and I'm yelling the whole time. How you got this job is a mystery because you are the worst manager I've ever encountered. You have no people skills. You're a terrible human being, and as I'm walking by people's offices, they're applauding me. The HR guy is in the hallway now, and I walk up to him and say, sorry, I can't take it anymore. And he nods, knowing it was coming at some point anyway. She's right behind me, and she's terrified. She was let go not too long after. Story 26. I worked at a local cookie shop when I was in high school. It was very small, low-key, and pretty casual. We chose our own hours, and our boss was pretty cool. She just was very specific about stuff sometimes. If something wasn't done the exact way she asked, you'd get a passive-aggressive comment. She also had a bad habit of keeping us overtime. We still got paid, but if your shift was 10-4, chances are you were there till 4:30, but you got used to it. Then one day a guy came in, we'll call him Brian, and started working for us. I didn't know him, but he went to our school and was my age. He, I think, was a part of some organization that helped high schoolers find jobs. So he had a very strict schedule, unlike the rest of us. Every MWF from 3:30, 5:30 he worked, except he always got pissed if he had to finish something before he left. Plus, he hated how specific my boss was and was just an all-around angry person. Then one day, he just never came back. I think he was fired because my boss never mentioned it, but he had definitely left on not-so-great terms. It was weird, but we all just went with it. Plus, we were kind of glad he had gone. He wasn't very good at his job. A year later, I saw an article that he had been arrested for hit a guy. Another 6 months after that, he was involved in an assault case. I always knew he was an angry kid, but damn, I scooped cookie dough right next to a dude who hit a guy. Story 27. In college, I was a shift manager at a fast food restaurant. The service and food there was horrible because the other managers, including the store manager, were extremely lax and never attempted to discipline or even ask the lazy, disruptive employees to do their jobs. One night, I was the closing manager, and this one particularly bad employee was really getting on my nerves. She was trying to start her closing process during the dinner rush, to which I told her multiple times she cannot leave the counter unattended and that pre-close protocol cannot be started until 7. Very basic rules in place for good reason. Every time I caught her standing around and talking, I politely asked her to get back to work. Next thing I know, she's in the back of the restaurant spraying another employee with the hose from the sink. After that, I kept on her the whole night to make sure she actually did her job. When she went on her break, she left and just never came back. The note I left in the computer for the morning manager was something like, busy dinner rush, so-and-so called off again, and Susie quit, I think. I asked her to do her job, so she left and never came back. Story 28. I had been working at this horrible burger place for a little over a year, and my boss was the world's largest a hole. She constantly berated and yelled at the employees in front of customers over the pettiest crap. The day I quit, I forgot to charge an extra 25 cents for cheese, and she screamed at me for a solid 5 minutes. I had finally had enough, so I told her very calmly that I was quitting, and I went and clocked out. She kept screaming and told me I couldn't quite right now because I still had my work shirt on, and that was company property. So I took off the shirt in the middle of the restaurant and walked out in my bra. Story 29. I worked in a food court next to a merry-go-round. One of my coworkers, though this guy on the merry-go-round was looking at him funny, he goes up to ask the security guy what would happen if he fought the guy. Security told him he would be escorted off the property. He still attempted to fight the guy. We had to fire him because he was banned from the mall for a time period. Story 30. I worked at a bakery, and shortly after I started, it was taken over by a micromanaging, power-tripping control freak of a woman with absolutely no business experience whatsoever. She ran us all into the ground, tried to take away our day off after Christmas, after I'd worked multiple open-to-close shifts back-to-back, and after she doubled the number of items we sold. She was a ducking nightmare. Customer complaints went through the roof because she instituted ridiculous rules, was staggeringly inconsistent, and couldn't oversee things properly. So many mistakes were made. She nearly fired me for explaining that something she wanted to do violated physical laws. She knew nothing about running the bakery, but refused to listen to those of us who did. In the end, she drove me to a nervous breakdown, and I quit. But I didn't just quit. I took everyone else with me. As soon as I left, everyone else started leaving too. She lost all her senior staff, her catering manager, literally everyone who actually worked save one person. In the end, she was left with her resident kiss-ass, the baker who routinely showed up hours late and did weed constantly, the woman who worked with me at my location and desperately needed her job, the aforementioned hard worker who was a very nice person and whom I liked very much, and a revolving door of employees who got a taste of what she was like and left. Then she quit. Things had been rough for months. Boss lady had been trying to buy flour from other local bakeries, which was a huge no-no. We did our own grinding from berries on site and fresh daily. And then one day people turned up to locked doors, a dark store, and a sign saying the place was closed. Boss lady had shut it down overnight and skipped town. She'd killed one of, if not the, highest performing franchises in the country for that bakery, and it has yet to return to town. Story 31. So this goes back to when I was a manager at McDonald's while I was working through college. To get it, you need some backstory. So the store was pretty old and poorly laid out. One day when one of the other employees was stocking up the sauce cart, she pushed it a little too hard, and one of its edges cut a network cable under the counter. The store manager called in a support ticket, but it would be 3 days before they could send a tech, holiday weekend, to repair it. I was the only person in the store with any tech savvy and knew it was just a matter of replacing the cord. I told him I had a spare at home that I could loan at no cost until they got a tech in to officially replace it. Went home, had him sign off that it was mine, and replaced it. 2 days later, he canceled the call. Fast forward 2 years, and same manager out of nowhere starts accusing me of stealing a deposit, even though there is video of the safe and back office, where the deposits are gathered before getting dropped into a lockbox within the safe, proving that at no point in time was I anywhere near said deposit. I was on video for my entire shift in the kitchen, again, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that I never even laid eyes on said deposit bag. He gets so up in my face and aggressive about that, I eventually said fine. Threw my store keys on the counter, walked out to my car, grabbed the sheet that he signed off saying the cable was mine, walked back in, unplugged my cord, clocked out, and went home. 4 days later, they finally got their computer systems back up so they could actually use their registers. Story 32. Had a guy get hired in at a retail store who was going through a divorce. He worked with us for 6 months before he quit. His wife was a doctor and didn't want this divorce to worry her partners and her reputation. Instead of finalizing the divorce, the guy gave her a deal. Pay me $10,000 a month and I'll stay married, but we will be separated. They signed a legal document with some lawyers behind closed doors. The last day he came into work and told me the story. About 2 hours into our shift together, his wife walked in and handed him a check for $10,000. He looked at me and said, "Well, good luck for the day," and walked out. He did not notify any managers as he was walking out. We have headsets, and I hear, getting louder I might add, our manager on duty yelling in the headset for him. He tossed it on the floor on his way out. When the manager came up to me and asked what happened, I explained what occurred. The manager told me he was never hiring anyone going through a divorce again. Story 33. A coworker keeps bringing his school books to work. Another coworker decides to bring it upon himself to police this non-work related activity and keeps hiding said textbooks. This goes on for a while, rankling the first coworker until it pisses him off so much that he tells the manager, who tells the guy to knock it off. "No, fire me." "Okay, you're fired." A couple minutes of back and forth, and disbelief turns to rage. The guy picks up one of those old CRT monitors off a desk and hurls it across the room. He was a pretty strong guy. Story 34. My former manager at a previous store. Dude was a typical alpha douche. He was so very concerned about us not liking him though. Couldn't figure out why. He constantly changed his mind about how he wants things done and would Karen if you didn't do it his way. I got Karened at for stocking the toilet paper the way he had wanted it 2 days prior. I had been off for a couple days, so I wasn't even aware of the new method. Well, my crew was made up of veteran stockers and very tight-knit. We didn't appreciate his meddling. Made his life hell. He swore many times that he would fire us, but it was never taken seriously. The store manager would never allow the entire crew to be fired. In fact, most of us would have to seriously duck up to be fired. So one day he goes on emergency vacation for a family emergency in Chicago. Turns out he went back home to find a new job. Duck you, crying Ryan, story 35. There was this guy at work who did the classic, "I'm talking crap about the boss, and I don't realize he is standing right behind me" thing. We worked at a deli, and he was hilarious. He once asked an a-hole customer, the kind that comes in twice a week and brings his sandwich back every single time because it's always not how he wanted it, Would you like semen on that? Completely straight-faced. Anyway, he is standing by the entrance to the kitchen. We were complaining about the boss. He is counting out the register and starts going off. He then goes off about how the boss bought the deli through selling substances. The boss was actually writing the schedule on the calendar the whole time and heard his whole tirade. The boss had a hell of a temper and was usually drunk when he came to the deli and just beamed into this guy like no tomorrow. The whole time the guy was just laughing, knowing he was had and heading to his car. The boss followed him out screaming the whole way and screamed at him as he drove off. The boss didn't say anything to me or my coworker. It was just the three of us working. He just went to the fridge and took out a case of Heineken and drove off. It was hilarious. I still think about it and laugh. Story 36. I worked in telecom in their finance department. I was originally hired to do 1/3 of the payment process for roughly 800 accounts, 150 vendors. After my original hiring manager stepped down, whom I adored, the business tried to reorganize our department. This reorganization resulted in my job now involving 3/3 of the payment process for over 3,000 accounts, over 500 vendors, without the proper increase in pay grade or job title. There were about 7 to 10 other people in the same position as me that were then given this new responsibility without any choice in the matter and without offering increased payment for the increased duties. I started out by being polite and professional about the increased workload without increased pay. I raised concerns to my immediate supervisor during one-on-one meetings and during team meetings. About 8 months later, I was far less polite and professional. I was often told if I was unhappy with the situation, I was more than welcome to quit, to which I would spitefully reply. If they were unhappy with my complaining about increased workload without increased payment benefits, they could fire me and I'd happily collect unemployment for wrongful termination. Eventually, we were given a minimal raise and a new job title was created especially for us. I put in my 2 weeks notice that day and eventually left after only 1 week so I could take some time off between jobs, because duck that place. Story 37. I quit my job in a doctor's surgery by telling the lead doctor to go duck herself and stick the job up her rise after being accused of not being marked as logged on when I was in work one day. The fact that she went into the system and printed it out pissed me off because that said day, she had me doing most of her admin work on her computer and she damn well knew it. Thing is, I'm such a calm person and would never speak to someone like that, but it made me mad that she was outright lying when she knew full well I was on her computer. I did this in front of the whole staff because she had the audacity to try and humiliate me like that. I went back home, laid on the couch, and cried. I'm still laid on my couch crying about it. Wasn't one of my smartest choices in life. Story 38. My own rage quit when I was younger was pretty funny, I think. I used to work at a Denny's restaurant not too far from home. I like pretty much everybody that I work with, including a really big black guy named James. James was always really cool with me. I worked the graveyard shift and I was a young, small white kid in a not-so-good side of the city. James would always stick up for me when I got the really crazy drunk people. I don't remember what we got into an argument about, but I got really heated. I was so pissed off that I took one of the small trays that was holding the drinks that I was carrying, dumped all the drinks on the ground, and threw the small serving tray literally into the ceiling saying, "Duck this, I'm out of here," before storming out of the restaurant. It was those ceiling tiles that you could push up and move out of the way. So when the tray hit it, it knocked one of the ceiling tiles out of the way. The tray landed inside the ceiling, and the ceiling tile fell back into place. I was pissed off at the time, but in hindsight, it was probably pretty hilarious. I came back the next day and worked as normal, as though nothing had happened. The manager didn't say anything to me, and James and I worked out our issues. Story 39. I work in a bar/restaurant. There was a point where we only had one chef due to 2 being on holiday and the kitchen manager taking the rest with him when he changed jobs. While our GM did put out a plea for help to other venues of the chain, it fell on deaf ears. What she shouldn't have done is put the poor guy on open close every single day. He tried, bless him, but no one should even be asked to do that, and he wasn't asked. At the end of the night, he closed down the kitchen, dipped his fingers in the oil tub, and wrote 86 on the back wall. Never came back. Story 40. I worked for Walmart for several years as a teenager. The day I finally quit, I walked into the store for a 3:30 to 11:30 shift. I went into my manager's office and said, "Patsy, I'd like to thank you for making the last few years at Walmart a living ducking hell. I'm leaving because you are an awful person, and I'm so glad I'll never have to deal with your crap again." I then ripped my name tag off, threw it at her feet, and then did so with my wallet mark vest. I then began to walk away. She then told me to get back here, so I did and threw my discount card into the air because I forgot they would need their precious 10% off card back. I stormed out high-fiving my favorites on the way to my car. She was a Karen and would frequently do things that were rather illegal in the workplace that I should have reported sooner than I did. Story 41. I worked a shift in a factory once where a guy working a job near me was tripping something bad. This guy was normally pretty ducking weird, so we didn't pay much attention to it. Suddenly, I look over, He stops what he's doing, screams, Caw, I can fly, I can fly. He then flapped his arms, ran down a hallway, and slammed into the side of a huge piece of machinery. It seriously looked like a ducking bird flying into a clear window. Out, cold. Our plant manager ended up calling the hospital to find out what the hell happened. Oh, and to pass on the message that he's fired. Definition of weird? Okay, so here's an example. I once saw him spend an entire break watching pans move down a conveyor. His head bobbed back and forth for 20 minutes, tracking each pan as it went. Almost a full year later, he randomly returned to the plant at 4 in the morning, dressed up and everything, and went to the foreman's office looking for Sheila, who had reportedly called him in. There never was anybody named Sheila that had ever worked there as a supervisor. 3 days later, they replaced the 1 to 34 number lock on all the doors with an RFID pass system. Story 42. I worked in an oil and gas company some years ago. The head office, front office, not an oil rig. Very corporate. One of the specialists, geophysicist, had an office full of stuff. Mostly books and papers and rocks and samples. Just stuff. So much stuff. It was packed up against the glass walls and there was barely any room to move. It looked horrible compared to the rest of the place, which was very clean and streamlined. The boss said, clean out your office. What the boss meant was, clean out your office, make it look tidy, take some of that crap home. What the employee heard was, clean out your office. You're fired for no reason at all. Despite 20 years of great service, employee went insane, used his rocks to smash all those clean and tidy glass walls, oil samples on the carpets, abuse, screaming, holes in the wall, smashed up computers, desks broken, every plate and cup and glass in the kitchen smashed, microwave smashed, fridge door torn off. It was like the Hulk had a fit. Lawsuit went on for years. Shame, because other than his dirty rocks, he was a great employee up until that point. Communication is key, kids. Story 43. I used to work as a valet. We were working in a kind of upscale restaurant, and a guy had brought a customer's car up front while the customer finished eating his dessert and paying his bill. Normally, the car gets parked in the front, kind of on the sidewalk between a telephone pole and a fire hydrant. The guy I was working with got into the car, it was a newer Subaru Outback, and just gunned it in reverse and backed right into the fire hydrant. Put a basketball-sized hole in the back of the car and knocked the hydrant right out of the ground. Fortunately, it wasn't active and no water pipes burst or anything. He cried and then got fired. Story 44. I worked at a gas station convenience store. I was training an employee who had been there about a week on the cash at this time. So this guy comes in and buys a bunch of stuff in the store, totaling over 100. I'm around cleaning and letting the trainee handle the cash as he's got the hang of it by this point. So the transaction goes well, but about 10 minutes later, we realize that one gas pump of like $60 hasn't been paid and the car isn't there anymore. We figured out it was that guy that bought all the stuff in the store. We tell the owner and he flips. He said something along the lines of, "What am I supposed to do? Call the cops and tell them my employees are stupid?" He demands that the money missing comes out of my paycheck as well as the trainees. I said not a chance. He told me it was either that or find a new job, so I took my work shirt off there and then and threw it at his face and left. Still pisses me off. Completely illegal happenings all around. Wish I knew as much about employment law then as I do now. Story 45. I once quit a job as a maintenance supervisor at a gym in a pretty fulfilling way. There were roughly 70 televisions that would normally air news and sports. At the bottom of the screen was a ticker bar that would announce class schedules and gym events. I placed a fairly direct resignation letter on the ticker bar and had all the televisions play Slack Mother Ducker by Superchunk on repeat. The chorus line is, "I'm working, but I'm not working for you, you Slack Mother Ducker." Changed the password for the TV control system and walked out. As the manager was scrabbling to turn off all the screens and gym goers were cracking up everywhere. Story 46. I used to drive truck for a farm research station with a huge fenced-off yard for vehicles and heavy equipment. It was a strictly enforced 15 miles per hour area. One of the laborers was nicknamed Horse. I never knew his real name. Everyone just called him Horse. He was a hardcore alcoholic, missed a ton of days, always showed up late and hung over. Finally, one Friday, the station manager had had enough, threatened to fire him if he wasn't at work by 8 a.m. on Monday and from then on. Sure enough, 7:58 a.m., Horse comes screaming into the yard doing about 45-50 in his early 80s Chevy Land Yacht, does a full lap of the yard, drifting most of it, then comes skidding to a stop, half in the station manager's parking spot. The driver's door flies open and Horse falls out, completely wasted, along with about 8 beer cans. But hey, he was there by 8. FTR, his back registered 0.16 when he was given a breathalyzer about an hour later. Story 47. We hired a couple of extra people for the bakery because We've been losing bread wrappers, packers like crazy. Some days we'd be lucky to have one all day. Well, one got fired for letting her family come into the bakery and allowing them to get cookies off the racks without paying for them. She only got caught and fired for it because a couple of people walked through and caught her. This happened a few weeks ago. I mentioned this in another comment in another thread. Another one got fired because she had been put into jail a year or so ago and never mentioned it on her application, nor had she mentioned any pending court dates that were recently coming up. I don't know why she had been in jail or the reason why she still had court dates, as I worked with her on Saturday, and when I came into work today, she was no longer with the company. The only reason why any of us working today knew the newest bread wrapper had been in jail and the pending court dates was because our manager made a point to tell us that if anyone else had any criminal records we were keeping for the company, it was best to come forward now. Story 48. Worked at a member-only box store. Members often thought they could do anything because they pay for a membership. One member got irate when the cashier told him that his membership expired. The supervisor stepped in and pulled him into the office with another manager. They calmly told the guy that he would have to renew, and he spit out a racially charged tirade against the cashier and supervisor. The supervisor was a boxer and jabbed the guy 3 times in the face, then took off his name tag and laid his keys on the desk and walked out. Story 49. Worked at a Papa John as a shift leader, and my good friend was the GM of the store. We were probably 20 or 21. We had hired this new guy as a delivery driver. Dude seemed weird and was probably in his mid-30s. He was always late to work and always not wearing his uniform. I opened the store one day. GM buddy came in to close and this driver was scheduled to come in. GM told me that if this guy showed up late again, he was going to fire him and wanted me to stick around in case things got sour. He was late and GM calls him into the office. I'm sitting at the front of the store, eavesdropping. Guy says he's always late because he's also a carpenter, but GM wouldn't have it. Dude storms out of the office yelling, "Duck you, this is bull crap," and other stuff. Gets in his car, slams the door, and peels out. Comes back in like 5 minutes later. GM comes out of his office, and dude asks him what day we get paid. Okay, well, duck you. It was hilarious. Story 50. I worked on a big military housing project about 10 years ago. One of the inspectors was a big, loud, very imposing former drill instructor. Let's call him Cleveland. We got along very well. We had a large storm in the area which caused a lot of damage. We had to keep working, but it prevented the sanitation company from being able to service the porta for a few days. With several hundred workers, they became unusable very quickly. Anyways, I am building a deck on the front of one of the houses when I see Cleveland coming up the street, obviously very agitated. When he gets within hearing distance of me, he starts yelling, "You, my name? Guess what I just caught those mother-ducking roofers doing?" Me, I don't know, Cleveland, what? Cleveland, I just caught those mother-duckers crapting in the ducking corner of the ducking garage. Clamnolin, I told those mother-duckers to pack their crap and get the duck out of here before I put my boot up their mother-ducking asses. Mother-duckers. Then he storms off, careening at anyone who crossed his path. Story 51. My coworker informed our supervisor that they would be taking a new opportunity and would have to resign, effective immediately. The supervisor was understanding and even had him complete the shift so he would get salary for the entire day. My coworker busted his ass and worked harder than ever for his last day. And the supervisor also made sure the sick days he took last week were properly entered before the end of his last day. We get paid sick leave on an as-needed basic, but if it wasn't signed off on before he quit, he wouldn't have gotten the money. At the end of the day, we held a team meeting to wish him well. It was a great time all around. Story 52. Here goes. My team leader at my workplace got suspended and will probably be fired. He was the epitome of an arsehole and was always hassling me and the staff members, even as going so far to harass my female colleagues and touching them in a sexual manner, as well as cussing out one of my colleagues' children. Along with me and our colleagues, the majority of us signed a complaint letter addressing his conduct and his behavior. We all got our union involved and sent a copy of the complaint letter to them, as well as sending a copy to the HR department. I came to work and found out from my colleagues that he got suspended. We were all overjoyed at this, and now our workplace feels more calmer and nicer. And to my now former team leader, who I'll not name here, we all want to say this: we're ducking happy to see the back of you and won't miss you at all. Story 53. A hostess at my job was on her first shift. The manager at the time just left her at the host stand, and we crashed hard. Because she didn't understand the flow, she was double, triple seating severs, which eventually she crashed the kitchen. After the shift, I was in the back eating some food, and she came back and asked me if I had anything to write with. I didn't. She looks around, finds a purple crayon, scribbles "I quit, good luck" on a napkin, tapes it to the office door, and walks out. Story 54. One of my coworkers at Jimmy John's had apparently quit the week before I was hired. In fact, I had been hired to replace her. But on my very first shift, she's there, working the register, and continues to come in during my shifts for that first week. Found out later that once the managers got over their initial confusion as to why she was there at all, they asked her about it. They basically told her that she had quit the week prior and shouldn't be coming in for her shifts because she wasn't being paid, which should have been obvious because she wasn't on the payroll anymore. She responded by saying something along the lines of, "I wasn't actually serious about that, but was told to leave regardless." Story 55. I didn't see it, but my best friend's roommate quit Dairy Queen by yelling at the manager saying, "I quit," and made himself a blizzard on the way out. My memory's fuzzy on this one, but there was an article a while back about a man who quit his job via a YouTube video, and he was hired by another company based off of his video. Story 56. Was attending a festival at a local garden store. They were having crazy deals on plants, free seeds and buds, refreshments, the whole 9 yards. They had even set up a face painting tent run by a local face painting company. Obviously, this was the place to be. After standing in line for a half hour among little kids, it was finally my turn. I sat down in the chair, started chatting with the face painter, when she got a phone call, which turned out to be from her boss. She excused herself to take the call. I didn't hear anything the boss said, but it must have been pretty bad because throughout the span of the 10-minute call, she got increasingly agitated and started shouting. At the end of the call, she totally quit her job and told her manager to find someone else to finish up this gig. I'm still sitting in the chair, totally in awe. We concluded this strange interaction with me as her final painting, her swan song. Story 57. Worked at a movie theater. We weren't allowed to be on our phones at all while in uniform, even if we clocked out. We had to wait to be out of the building. So this girl, a little dim-witted, walks right past our district manager while on her phone in uniform. He orders the assistant manager to fire her the next day. So we are in the break discussing her being fired, and she walks in. Now, someone goes, "Oh, I thought you were fired." She just says, "What?" His reply was to say, "Oh, never mind. We are talking about pancakes." And everyone was just played along. She went in a few minutes later and came back crying, stating she's been fired. She was already on thin ice, and this was her last write-up because she consistently came back uneven in her drawer and wouldn't really do her job. Story 58. I had just started as an intern on this digital department of a big company. The ET guys were a special group, really cool, friendly guys that just kind of did their own thing. The rest of the company was full of pretentious wannabes, so I really liked the IT guys. Well, fast forward a couple of weeks into the internship. We had a big goodbye party for 2 colleagues that had been at the company for a while. Table was rented at a nice terrace, summertime, and many pitchers of beer were bought. Apparently, a fight erupted between my manager and one of the IT guys. Next thing I know, the IT guys emptied the entire pitcher on top of our manager. He was soaked for the rest of the evening. The IT guy just left, and actually never even came back to work. He just took out all of his holidays and then gave his month's notice. Definitely an interesting start to my working life. Story 59. When I was in high school, I worked at a vet clinic. After getting caught smoking a cigarette and not clocking out, my boss took a guy I worked with into her office and told him to read over and sign a disciplinary sheet saying he willfully disobeyed her by smoking without clocking out. We used to be able to take a break without clocking out, but the boss's son decided we shouldn't, whatever. He read over the document and just threw it back in her face, walked out and never came back. Seemed legendary at the time. Story 60. While I was in college, I worked at Walmart. I unloaded trucks and we were short-staffed due to one guy breaking his leg, another getting fired, etc. One of the training managers informed us that we had a new employee starting, but he had to do his CBT's computer-based training first. So, after a day or so of CBTs, they sent him to the receiving area. We're already unloading a truck, and we see this guy walk in. I asked, "Hey, are you the new guy?" He says, "Nope," and takes his name badge off and throws it on the table and walks off. The training manager came back to check up on him, but he was long gone. Story 61. I used to work in marketing at a street sweeper manufacturer under a very strict former Army sergeant boss. He wasn't the type to try and help people through struggles or work with you to find a solution. The buck stopped with you, regardless of rank. Needless to say, there was a lot of turnovers, especially in the production department. The boss would go down into production and chew people out, and it was just a bad situation. The production manager was constantly understaffed, always behind on production quotas, and he was just super flustered. So one day while corporate was inspecting, he came upstairs to the offices, walked in on a meeting with my boss and corporate, and said, "Hey, I quit," then walked out. He left and was never seen there again. He had been quietly moving his stuff out of his office and was just totally ready. It was pretty awesome. Story 62. When I was 20, I somehow wound up at the site manager for a global service desk call center. So I was young, dressed casual, and was going around meeting the new hires. One of them was showing another how he could remote knit to his home PC and watch adult film from work. He was very proud of himself. I walk up, ask what they're doing, and the kid shows me, not knowing who I am. Yeah, fired on the spot for inappropriate behavior and violating security policy. He was crying and begging. It was his first job, and his mother had set him up with it. He had to go home and explain. Story 63. In a support center, we had contractors and real employees. Contractors were hired on if they were good, and there were spots for them to be hired on. One woman, she was black, was upset that someone else got hired on before her, or maybe because she wasn't hired on yet. Sorry, it's been a while. She was okay at the job, but there were other people who were contractors that were better. She wrote a long email and sent it to the whole department, managers, manager's manager, and CEO of the company, and walked out. She basically said that she wasn't hired on because the manager was racist. He's not. And that she should have been hired on already. She called out my team lead, wasn't her team lead and never was, and said, "I'm still standing," at the end of the email. I was told she has done the same thing before at other companies in the area. Story 64. When I worked at Super America, it's a gas station in the Midwest, I got so sick of being underappreciated by my managers. I once had a customer go out of his way to tell the managers how awesome my customer service skills were, and all they did was grunt and shrug it off. I went into work on one of my scheduled shifts and handed the manager my vest and told him I would rather lick razor blades than work here one more day. His reply was, "So is this your 2 weeks notice?" Really? I believe that everyone gets at least one great quit, and this was mine. Story 65. I was off for a few days for my birthday. I'm sitting at my desk, and a few minutes after I come in, my colleague is all, "Oh man, there are going to be some big changes around here. Management isn't happy." And I just sat there for about 10 seconds in silence and just said, "Okay, I don't care, because I'm going to quit." I then handed in my notice and proceeded to work out my 2-month period by doing absolutely nothing because I was in a catatonic state of depression. That wasn't very cool, but I did enjoy just quitting at the slightest hint of having to do any work. Story 66. I was a case manager for a while after I finished undergrad, and there was another one at my office who was clearly ready to quit and retire. Anyways, right before an important state audit, all of the files this guy is responsible for go missing. Very bad situation since they wanted to review them. Owners calling the case manager who isn't picking up and slowly becoming angrier. After about 2 hours, she demands I call him and see what is going on. He picks up immediately and tells me to tell the owner. He went to his lake house in Wisconsin with the files and would not be returning them. She hits the roof. State shows up for the audit and fines her heavily for the missing files. $500 per client file, times 20 or so files. Story 67. First time I had to fire someone, I was nervous as hell. He was my age, so that made it all the more awkward. I took him to the front of the building and gave him the productivity down after consistent warning speech. He laughs and went to go back to his station. I say, "Hey man, I'm serious. We have to let you go." And he laughs, giving me another like, "Really?" And for a third time, I explain, "Yes, really." Never forget that one. Hit me in the gut. I had to fire the poor guy 3 times, then head to the bathroom and take a breather. Story 68. My mom had one of her coworkers just walk out and never come back. Kid was nice, but he was always counting the minutes until his next break and on his phone when he was supposed to be working. They were short-staffed at the time and couldn't really afford to be letting people go, so they kept him on. But he got several talkings too from the managers about his work ethic. One day, he just went out for a smoke break, left, and never came back. After 3 days of no call, no show, he was terminated as per policy. But the kicker is he still used that store as a reference on his resume. We know this because my mom got a call from a hiring manager for the company he applied to for his next job asking about him. Needless to say, my mom didn't exactly have the best things to tell them. Story 69. I actually once just picked up my crap and left. I got tired of being yelled at and harangued all day. I put my headset down, yay call centers, looked at my supervisor and coworkers and said, "I don't need this crap. Find some other ducktard to do this crap job." I grabbed my things, threw my badge on the desk, and left. I think I had a call on the line too, which is what set me off. I refuse to work in a call center ever again. Those places are ducking hell. The crap people get away with, either as customers or as management, is disgusting, and they didn't pay me enough for the emotional trauma. I went through all of my PTO in under a month when I finally made it through my probationary period because I was so stressed out. Story 70. There was this one guy who threw a hissy fit about his break time. He felt his break was too early into his shift, and when he asked the manager to change it, the manager said that they would have to see if they could find another time for him to go. Well, that answer wasn't good enough for this guy. So he quit on the spot, and then he walks out. You have everyone begging him to finish his shift as we were stupidly busy and understaffed. He ends up finishing the shift, while half assign everything, and then he never comes back. He doesn't give official 2-week notice. He doesn't come in for shifts he had scheduled, and he gets his mom to call the office to let the managers know that he did quit and will not be returning. What's the craziest way you've seen someone quit or get fired? Story 1. Worked in local TV news for nearly a decade. All the glorious stories and flameouts, the nerdy and the wordy. Ways in which to quit or get fired. In one market, the local TV news director would give his departing reporters a very special cup that was more an antique-looking ornate metal mug fashioned like it was made by a Virginia colonist, who's also a famous United States founding father. One pistol of a reporter who was being guided around a lot because management wanted her gone. After a particularly hard day at work, she stood up and said, "I'm done, I quit." When the news director came out of his office to see about the commotion, reading glasses perched on his nose, she turned to him and said, "Get me that ducking Jefferson cup, I'm done." She gathered her things and walked out. No Jefferson cup was given, allegedly, though the worst is when people just disappear into the ether. A local TV reporter was thrown in jail for bouncing checks, and authorities finally caught up to him. The story goes he spent a weekend in jail, bailed himself out somehow, and was gone. Just gone. He never came to get his things. No one knew where he went. I can remember his face, but I can't remember his name. Here today, gone tomorrow. One young college grad was working her first TV job, and she must have come straight from the graduation party. She'd received a dual degrees in communications and business. She wanted to save the world. She landed in a small town, in a small market, there to enlighten the masses. In the few days I worked with her, I came to learn she'd gone to Cal Poly and had been recruited by Microsoft. This was mid-90s, but turned down job offers to come work in the noble, truth-seeking profession. She was a firm believer in justice and all that stuff. 2 weeks later, she gets her first paycheck, and a realization set in. She opened it up, read how small a number it was for the 2 weeks of work, normally 60 hours. She walked out that day, flew back to California. I like to think she ended up in a profitable career in the technology business, maybe WorldCom. One energetic reporter was arrested for breaking and entering. This man created such an antagonistic relationship with the local sheriff's office, and after being shut down on story after story, he took matters into his own hands. He broke into the sheriff's office one afternoon by slipping into a side door of the department in a, quote, restricted area, and made it through the back halls to 3 stories into the sheriff's department. With camera on his shoulder and a mic in hand, he proceeded to enter the sheriff's main office and rapid-fire question after question he'd wanted an answer to. He was detained for a short time. He was toast after that. I remember a camera guy was hired and fired within 2 weeks. He was fine the first day at work. Then each preceding summer day, he got more and more ripe. Now these prim and proper female reporters had to spend sometimes hours and hours during the day seated next to this cameraman going from story to story, in which they complained at first, quietly, and then defiantly stating, "I'm not getting into a car with someone that smells like swamp ass." He was warned a few times, but whether unable to get to a shower or didn't understand body odor and was asked to leave and never come back. Many a female reporter felt herself pucker a little less at the news of his firing. Weathermen have a particular special place in the halls of quitting or getting fired. Ah, those stories. Story 2. A coworker of mine came to work at the auto parts store with a severe hangover. A customer got smart with him and made the comment, "Having a bad day?" My coworker punched the customer right in the mouth. Another customer said, "Hey, you can't do that." So my coworker punched him too. Then he walked out of the store. I've never seen him since. Story 3. Teacher here. A guy in my department, 3rd grade, put in for a personal day to go to the beach or something. The school refused to authorize a substitute for him, obviously. The dude called a babysitting service to watch his class while he went to the beach. We found a non-English speaking high school student showing the class cartoons on her computer while she took a nap. Needless to say, he was fired, and I'm pretty sure he had to have his licensure reviewed. To clarify, we only had to get approval for personal days if we gave less than 72 hours notice or left during an exams period or field trip day. There were only 2 or 3 subs on call each day, and they were for people who were sick, had emergencies, or otherwise physically incapable of getting into work. All other subs came through a separate state-run department that needed at least 3 days' notice. Story 4. I had to escort out someone who had an interim security clearance, but forgot to tell the investigators that she'd previously gotten a DUI on a military base. Our office idiot, thinking she was just leaving for the day, said, "Well, nice knowing you," and she burst into tears. During the exit brief, she somehow thought it relevant to bring up to us all that she'd been molested as a child and then chronologically document everything bad that has ever happened to her since that time. I was a new manager at this point, but had some senior staff with me. After we let her vent for a while, things calmed down, and they explained some of the smaller stuff about her benefits staying for the month and whatnot. Following this, they had me go out into the parking lot with this bawling woman to ski the security sticker off her car. As I'm chiseling away, suddenly remembers that her child was still in daycare on post. So I got to drive her up there, where she refused to settle her account with the daycare and drive her back to her car while she dramatically explained to her child that they don't have any money anymore, and she had no idea what they were going to do. Why you'd tell this to a 5 to 9-year-old is beyond me. All of this while I was trying to handle a regular day's worth of work over my cell phone. Story 5. A girl named pronounced Destiny let her aunt into the cell phone store I used to work at while we were opening so her aunt could steal phones. When I looked at the footage later, I was in the back doing registers and deposits and confronted her. She responded, "It's not like I let anyone be coming in here. She family and needs a phone." Dude, first, what the duck? Second, she took 7, not 1. Third, what the duck? Fourth, you work here and know that the active lines and EMIs in those phones will be blocked immediately, thus making them useless. Or at least had pretended to pay attention to that part when I trained you. And fifth, what the heck? Story 6. I think that airline attendant that grabbed a couple beers and slid down the emergency water landing slide wins this contest of how to quit like a boss. Story 7. Worked in a restaurant, and on his 3rd day of work, a new employee showed a picture of his banana that he saved on his phone to several female employees. Manager says that he has to go to his office after his shift so that he has to get a warning. Ends up grabbing the big bag of salt and black pepper and starts throwing it into all of the food that was prepped for a Saturday night and ran away. Story 8. I work in a retail wine spirits store. I'm in my late 30s and would usually be working each night with this guy in his early 20s. Let's just say his attitude and demeanor generally left something to be desired. Just before Christmas, I'm towards the back of the store, stocking the shelves, when, from the front of the store, he blurts out without warning, "Dude, did you know that," insert major plot twist here, "in the new Star Wars movie?" My initial reaction was, "Are you ducking kidding me, bro?" As the movie had literally come out the day before, and I hadn't seen it yet. For background, as with most people my age, Star Wars was an institution in my house, growing up and still is today. One of my first memories is seeing Empire Strikes Back in the theater. I was so taken aback by this little punk. "No, you see the new Star Wars yet or anything?" I gave him a pretty good verbal smack upside the head for a few about how stupid he was for ruining the movie for me, seeing as I was really looking forward to seeing it. Well, because this guy is a complete idiot and now feels guilty, he proceeds to attempt to download the movie illegally on his work terminal, which is also a regular desktop PC. Of course, he downloads a virus instead, which totally crashes the computer and renders its post capabilities useless. He feverishly spends the rest of the night attempting to fix the problem without any success. He asked me if I think he will get fired. I told him to fess up to the boss, tell him it was a stupid mistake and beg for mercy, and he may keep his G, as our boss is a pretty forgiving guy. Well, the next morning, my boss calls me and asks what happened to his terminal. Surprised to find out that he hadn't confessed, I told my boss the whole story. My boss ended up having to spend several $100s to get the computer up and running again, and we had to work off a single pose for about a week. When the kid came into work the next time, my boss handed him a check for all the wages he owed him and told him he was fired. Story 9. I worked grill at a Del Taco. Halfway through my shift, a big beast of a woman came in furious that she didn't get her shake. After 20 minutes of me trying to calm her down, even after telling her I'd give her the shake for free, I got fed up with her and customers in general. So I went in the back and filled a large cup with cold ranch dressing, gave it to her, and immediately quit. Story 10. My friend was a little dude, pointing his finger over and over bigger man, boss, and just ripping him apart like, "You piece of crap, duck you. You never ducking, never appreciate what we do. All you do is micromanage the hell out of us. We see you on Amazon. We see you looking at guns. We see you chatting to this girl all day. I never even liked you. Duck you. Blah, blah, blah." There was more to it, but I just remember seeing my boss tear up a bit since he was never in a situation like that before. HR had to come out and tell them to take this elsewhere since everyone was like, "Oh my, what the heck?" Story 11. I was a manager at a restaurant where we began promoting an employee up to management with us. A guy that I will call Jake was really nice and a great worker, but his personal life was a mess. So after he gets promoted, the safe is always coming up short after his shifts. This goes on for a few weeks before he is finally fired. They never caught him taking money, but the money he was in charge of always went missing. During his termination meeting, he is blaming us because we didn't teach him how to add the nightly totals. This is a small restaurant with a dismal profit. The nightly accounting was literally simple addition of 4-digit numbers, and he was a 40-ish-year-old man. I feel bad because he was a nice guy, but he's obviously stealing and must be pretty stupid to think that him adding the numbers wrong is why the money is missing. Plot twist. Years after leaving the job, I found out that another manager got fired for stealing. The scary thing is that she was the one who always found and reported Jake's money missing. The way closing worked, the night manager would count up the money and seal it in the safe, then the day manager would verify it. Well, she was always the day manager when his money was missing. So now I'm pretty sure that this guy got framed and lost a job he really needed. He was uneducated, had a poor work history, but was hardworking and likable. So a bump to manager was a good step up for him. I'm glad I had nothing to do with his termination, but now I feel like a banana for assuming he was a thief. Story 12. This one happened to me recently. I started working at a local t-shirt shop last April. It was a small group of 4 people who kicked out thousands of shirts a month. The first few months were great. I was learning how to print from the senior printer. He was a real good guy and had been holding down the company for 5 years. Summer was our busy time. We did a lot of summer camp stuff and we had been killing it and crushing our goals. About 2 months in for me, the owner walks in the shop with his son-in-law. The guy training me sees this and his jaw hits the floor. The owner walks over to my trainer and tells him he is going to hire his son-in-law back and asks if there's going to be a problem. My trainer proceeds to tell me how irate he is at this. Apparently, this guy worked there before and got into a big fight with the guy training me before going to jail for his 4th DUI. Everyone thought he was gone for good. We had a huge order come in early for a collage, 10,000 shirts, double printed. So the senior printer set up the job and ran them all week long, printing everything crooked and misaligned. He packed them all up and told the owner that was his last job, and he quit in the grounds. They were never supposed to bring the son-in-law back. Words were exchanged back and forth and it ended badly, but he got the last laugh. Every single one of those shirts came back and the company had to take a 25 grand hit. To add fuel to the fire, the owner had to reprint all 10,000 of them, and half of them got rejected again because he didn't know how to run the machine properly. Moral of the story: be good to your employees, especially if you can't do the job yourself. Story 13. A senior manager was quitting for a new job. He was always a little wacky, but super intelligent. So he decides to quit by announcing everyone's salaries, including the VPS. He just went to everyone's cubicle and said, "You make this much, and don't deserve it." A lot of pissed people afterwards, not at his antics, but at certain co-workers who made more money. VP was making $250K. At least that was good to know. Story 14. At my previous job, one of my co-workers who borrowed $2 from me once a week came into work a little late. My manager came up to him and said, "Hey man, your manager's having a meeting in the break room at the back of the store and wants to see you. Could you go meet with him?" Not thinking anything of it, he strolls to the back of the store, past his department, that he doesn't realize has one more person working than it should have. About 3 minutes later, I see him walking around the corner with a big frown and his arms behind his back. I'm thinking, crap, did John get fired? As he walks closer to me, I say, "Hey man, do you have that money you said you'd have for me today?" As I'm speaking, I realize he's in handcuffs. I'm not terribly observant, and being escorted by a police officer. As he fully exits the building, my manager yells, "Oh yeah, if you weren't clear on this, you're fired." Turns out, he had been ringing up gift cards for $200 a piece every shift and discounting them at the postas so that the drawer didn't come up short. He would have gotten away with it if he hadn't made his purchases with those gift cards and his employee discount. Story 15. I had a crazy manager once when I was on a janitorial crew in college. I am female and told her I was taking time off to go deer hunting. She thought that this meant that I was a lesbian, and then she hired a butch lesbian because she thought we would get along, as she put it. We did get along, but not romantically. However, her and a bisexual girl on my crew started to hook up. No big deal, really. They would often switch partners to work together, and people would switch with them so they could work together. Cut to one night when they were working together. No one could find them. Then, we got a call from clubs on the 4th floor that their only upstairs bathroom was locked from the inside and someone was making loud and disruptive noises inside. We go upstairs and we hear someone finish very loudly from inside. Boss tells us to unlock it, and we find them both in a compromising position. Clothes go on quickly and they are fired on the spot. Boss tells them to clean out their lockers now and return all equipment. They do, but they are yelling the entire time down all the stairs and corridors that they are being discriminated against for being LGBT and that they were going to sue the college. Never heard from them again, no idea if they did sue. However, if I ducked in the bathroom at work with my boyfriend, I feel like I should probably be fired too. Story 16. I worked as a server in a pretty popular restaurant in a city that was all but overrun by heroin addicts. When I first started, there was a guy who seemed pretty nice, albeit a bit slow. Turns out he wasn't slow, just always high. He was fired one night after getting caught passing out in front of the pose while putting an order in. Here's a story about me in high school. I worked at a Fazili's in a small town where everyone considered it fancy, and half the customers were illiterate idiots raging on pills. This rude dude came in one night, and ordered a pizza to go and demanded I go ahead and give him his breadsticks to eat while waiting. Usually I would have, but he was being a git and I was a passive-aggressive teen, so I told him I couldn't and pointed to the sign on the menu that said, breadsticks were not included with pizza. He yelled at me and demanded a manager, who came out and backed me up and told him he would have to buy some if he wanted some. The next day, I found out that the dude had called back in the morning and lied about the incident, saying I cussed him out and laughed at him. So the general manager gave him a free pizza and wrote me up saying that my next write-up I would be fired. That was my first write-up in the 2 years I worked there. So when she handed it to me to sign it, I wrote, "Duck you, I quit," instead and walked out. The Karen still gives me dirty looks when I see her around. 7 years later. Haha. Story 17. Oh my, I have the best story. You guys, this girl was freaking crazy. She was pregnant, which made her even more insane, and she was on heavy substances. Anyways, she was a server, and she just always had this nasty attitude towards people and always talked crap, but could never back herself up. No one really liked her because she always used her pregnancy as a pity party, and her presence was just miserable. So one day she goes off on one of her insane rampages and gets in the face of one of the calmest guys you'll ever meet. This guy is a Jehovah's Witness, like really, y'all. This guy is a saint. So anyways, she starts screaming at him and telling this poor guy to hit me mother ducker and has her fist pulled back like she's gonna punch him. And he's just standing there like, Yef? Keep in mind, all of this is going on during dinner rush, and she just doesn't even care. Finally, the manager steps in and this crazy-ass girl starts cussing the manager out, and the manager has to drag her to the back office. One thing leads to another. There's a lot of yelling, and this insane girl storms out of the office and takes the dustpan that's full of gross crap and dumps it in the middle of her section, screams loud as hell, and storms out of the building. She comes back a month later. She lost the baby due to her substances problem. She's jobless and still a crazy Karen. She attempted to get her job back, but obviously that didn't happen. Story 18. Back when I owned a plumbing company, I had an employee that wasn't quite a plumber yet, but could do service work pretty well. I had to send him to a new home for a punch list of some minor things. On the list was the shower head was making noise. When he was talking to the homeowner, a very nice-looking woman in her late 20s, she said that while in the shower head made a whistling noise. And he said to her, in front of the superintendent, "Well, if I saw you naked, I'd whistle too." She complained, and I had to let him go because at the time, that was the only development we had work in. Story 19. Someone stole a company car. I worked at a car rental agency. Not my location, but the store it happened at was the hub for our district. I used to go there on an almost daily basis, so I knew the guy. He was one of the counter reps. They all have keys to the store, as well as the alarm and the combination to the safe. It's a cashless business, so we just stored the car keys in there overnight. New Year's Eve. He decides he needs a shiny new whip to impress his date. Sneaks into the store after closing and treats himself to an Acura. Returns it early the next morning, thinking he made out like a bandit. I can't recall how he was caught. I guess they found a mileage discrepancy on the vehicle. That or the alarm company phoned to say someone had been in the store after hours. Probably a combination of the two. Anyway, they reviewed the surveillance footage and he was busted. Had he worked in at any other store in our district, he would have gotten away with it. Management was cheap, so cameras were only installed in high-risk areas. This particular store had a problem with parts theft, so there were eyes on the vehicle compound as well as the interior. It was the only time I worked there that someone took a car for a joyride after hours. Or at least the only time they were caught. Story 20. I work contract jobs. It is not uncommon to have 20 people on a job and over the course of, say, 4 months, the life of a contract, lose 2 to 3 to other jobs. It's called dragging up or dragging ass or whatever. We're on a fairly high-paying job, top 5% in wages plus per diem, and this guy has a date circled on his calendar. I forget what, let's just say it's Tuesday the 7th. Someone asked him what that was about 2 days before. Oh, that, he says all casual. Retirement date. He is an older guy, but most of the older guys that travel, more money but longer hours and more stress, tend to be on their 3rd or 4th wives and had money issues, etc. We make S figures, but I'm not sure many that age still traveling are ever going to retire. No one believes him. Now we don't do much in a day for most of the project. Medium to heavy workload on the front end, lots of sitting, then very heavy on the end of the project. We are mid-project. After that day, he shows up, every day, very politely refuses to do anything as he is retired. 2 months pass, and now people are getting pissed because he has done nothing, and we are getting back to needing to work every day. They never fire anyone as it looks bad and lawsuits, etc. So they give this guy his layoff. He is happy, takes his unemployment, and is retired. Story 21. When I started working at a call center, we were given a few examples of real recordings of phone calls to listen to give us an idea of what good and bad customer service sounds like. You get the idea. You don't physically answer a call in a call center. You know that you're connected with a customer when you hear a 1-second long, quite high-pitched beep through your headset. In the last recording we listened to, the first thing we heard was the beep, but the agent didn't do any greeting. There was just silence. The elderly lady customer shouts, "Hello? Hello?" but still no answer. All you can hear is background office noise and some muttering from nearby. Then suddenly the agent, seemingly completely unaware that the customer is listening, shouts, "Listen, if you don't shut the duck up, then I'm gonna take my car and ram it up your ducking ass." The old lady customer sounds appalled and says, "Is this company name?" The agent finally hears the customer, realizes that the customer has been listening in the entire time, says, "Oh, crap," in the most panicked way possible, and then hangs up. Needless to say, she was fired within the next hour. Apparently, the agent was having an argument with her colleague next to her. Story 22. On my first week as a new hotel front desk manager, I was doing a night shift with my assistant front office manager, so I knew what night shift did when some guests came out of the elevator. I didn't know them from Adam, so when the guy came over asking for replacement keys, I went through the whole normal process and got him keys. My AFOM, however, looked pissed. I helped the guy and looked to see what she was looking at, and it was the other guest who was in her underwear and a bra, and was over chatting with the night security guard. I thought it was odd, but whatever. People get locked out all the time. Maybe my AFOM was a prude, who knows. The guy went over to the girl and the two went back upstairs. The next night, I saw the main schedule had been changed and one of the employees was crossed out. I asked my AFOM who it was, and she pulls up a picture of the fired employee on her phone. It was the nearly naked girl from the previous night. Apparently, she'd been given warning to stop going up to guests' rooms and sleeping with them. But since she figured I had no idea who she was, which was true, she could get away with it. She didn't expect my AFOM to be there that night. Story 23. I used to work at a job in ad sales where, when you made a deal, you would hit a gong and people would go up to you, clap, and give you high five. One day, a pretty brunette girl made a sick deal, goes up to the gong, hits it, then turns around, sticks up 2 middle fingers and says, "Peace, Koreans, I quit." It was ducking and awesome. I wish I got her number. Story 24. I used to work at a college bookstore, and one guy quit and took a dump in the front pocket of a hoodie and put it back on the rack toward the back. It was there for 2 days before anyone could find it. Story 25. I worked at a major chain musical instrument retailer. It's a great job to have in your early 20s, and it was in Los Angeles, where a ton of musicians trying to make it live. So of course, every person that plays guitar, drums, DJs wants to get hired there, and the callback list is miles long. So this guy, who applied every 6 months for 3 years, finally gets hired. The store is a bunch of musicians selling what they love. But yeah, substances use was pretty commonplace. And as long as it didn't affect anything, you were probably going to get a pass. Well, this guy shows up his first day, gets shown around, then gets left in the break room alone to watch the training videos. Break room was attached to the Brass Plus Woodwinds depot I worked in, so I'm the first person our female cashier came running to. Guy was sitting buck-ass naked in the break room sink, splashing water onto his crotch, head to the ceiling, just tripping straight balls. I have to check he's not about to die as the cashier goes and gets a manager. Yay, he was fired on the spot and escorted from the parking lot. Story 26. I used to manage a call center for the AFL-CIO in my mid-20s. I had just promoted this guy to assistant manager and let him hire some people, and he hired this guy who used to fundraise for the local opera house. Seemed like a good fit, since there was no fundraising, so if he was good at that, he'd rock at this. He worked for us for about 2 weeks before one day getting up, smashing his chair on the floor, shouting, "Duck this! Duck all of you! I ducking hate the unions! Commie sons of Karinis!" He threw the half of the chair he was still holding across the room, stormed out, never to be seen or heard from again. I felt so bad for my assistant, who hired him because he had been his first real hire. When I left, I promoted him to my position, and he was a great manager for that office for several years. Story 27, mid-1990s. We were in crunch mode at work, trying to hit a contractual deadline. All hands on deck, working weekends for a month. It's 85 degrees, 30 C in the building because they don't run AC on weekends. Everyone is stressed. One guy never shows, but the managers won't discipline or fire him because he has magic powers. Tandem mainframe server admin. Server guy strolls in at 5 on Sunday because his beeper went off. There's no emergency he can find. My cube neighbor is giving the guy crap about the rest of us working, and he's off mountain biking. More verbal abuse. Finally, server guy grabs the geek, pins him to the wall, and gives him a couple punches to the gut and face. Server guy outweighs geek by at least 50 pounds, 22 kilos, so it's no match. We break it up, and server guy leaves. Geek dials 911, and I dial the general manager. Cops come, take report. 10 guys confirm server guy started the fight. GM takes the crew to a titty bar to convince Geek to not press charges. Next day, server guy is fired. Geek admits he faked the pager request to screw with server guy and was happy as hell with the outcome, despite having a black eye. Story 28. I worked on a government software project that was fairly stressful. Everyone was basically just running around putting out fires all the time. Our test lead, who has gone on to run the entire enterprise process team for our large organization, had finally had enough of the upper-level project management. He put together a presentation on the status of his test organization. It had all the normal stuff in it, like number of defects found, program risks, etc. But when he got to the end, there was the Einstein quote about the definition of insanity as trying the same thing over and over and expecting different results. After that slide, he began briefing his plan for the test team going forward. Things such as lab equipment, tasks they need to cover, new personnel, etc. Finally, his last slide was an updated org chart that had his name missing. Story 29, ooh, fun. I used to work in Japan for a company that went bankrupt in a specifically horrible way. Everyone found out because they didn't receive paychecks. Japanese employees had been going for months without paychecks. My boss insisted we all show up for work, that this was a bump in the road. I flat out refused, notified my boss, and he threatened to tell HR that I had not been working for the work period, an entire month. Being a weirdo plush punk, I gave my friend's husband and his thugs, junky-looking bandmates a bag of beer to come over and hang out in the lobby where students hang out. He let me go home pretty quick and told me he'd tell HR I worked the month. He was a creep in several other ways. I couldn't believe he was ducking the branch over promising they'd get paid. The company was already going spectacularly belly up all across the news, and no one got paid, and everyone started applying for the same small pool of other jobs. Story 30. I worked as a dishwasher at a restaurant, and we were all very relaxed. I'd help prep, cook pizzas, and I made myself lunch on long days. We got a new line cook. He was in his 50s and liked to refer to himself as a chef. The first day he tells says, "I never gave you permission to come onto my line when I go to grab something." He took a similar attitude with everyone else. He made the mistake of sauntering into the kitchen during the Friday night rush, he was off, when we were going crazy. He jumps right in the middle and starts trying to tell the kitchen manager that he'd be taking the next day off. The headline cook tells him to GDFO his line before he bashed him in the head with a pan full of mussels. The new guy responds by yelling, "I ain't no punk Karen," and wants to fight. His Karen ass was dragged out the back door and fired by the kitchen manager. The owner came in to see what the commotion was. He kind of shrugged and sighed, then left the kitchen. Story 31. I work for one of the automakers in Detroit. We had a Middle Eastern contract engineer who, while he claimed to have 2 master's degrees and working on a PhD, was completely worthless. He was supposed to run meetings, and I basically had to use him like a sock puppet and tell him what to say. Nothing major, just things like, "Thank you for coming. Our next meeting is at X time next week." There was a lot of hand-holding and babysitting. He wanted a direct job so bad, he actually offered to work as a janitor as long as it was direct. At the time, the contractors had green badges and the direct employees had blue badges. One fine day, frustrated that he wasn't being offered to convert to a direct employee, he offered up this pearl. "Maybe if I put all the blue badges in a room and blow it up, there will be room for me to get hired." He was escorted out by security within the hour. He left me a post-it note that said, "Thank you for helping me. You are a gift from God." Yikes. Story 32. Work at a pizza place in Tallahassee. The chef was real fed up with his pay and the heat, and during the middle of a Friday night shift, he just went out to the back of the restaurant, pulled a ladder against a fence, and hopped over it without telling anyone. The waitresses thought he was on a smoke break for about a half hour. He keeps up his vengeance by calling the restaurant a few times a month, ordering complex requests, and then never coming to pick them up. Story 33. We were having pizza and beers in the office one Friday evening, and a new member of staff arranged for her dealer to meet her out in the car park and sell her substances. She then proceeded to do a couple of lines in the work bathroom and offer some to at least 2 of our colleagues. It's actually ridiculously hard to fire people for substances-related issues in the UK, but she was still in her probationary period. So she wasn't technically fired. They just waited a month until her probationary review meeting and told her it wasn't working out. I'm all for helping people who have an issue and truly want help, but she is actually one of 3 different people who have brought their substances issue to work, and it frustrates me how hard it is to get rid of them. The second eventually got fired for stealing £5,000 to fund his habit. The third still works there and is a nightmare to deal with. Story 34. We hired this guy from a nearby company, and he thought he was a huge deal. Actually, he was a huge deal, but that doesn't matter because he was also a compulsive liar. He shows up 4 hours late on his first day, and for some reason, they take them with him on a sales call. He goes to the sales call, makes an ass of himself, and a bunch of people he claimed to know were like, "Who the hell are you?" At the airport, he disappears and we never see him again. He just stopped coming to work. A few weeks later, his laptop shows up in the mail. Meanwhile, we get a note from someone at the nearby company that he is still working there. HR gets involved and they tell the nearby company what he did. Being employed by two companies simultaneously violates both companies' confidentiality agreement. So basically, he quit my company without telling anyone and was fired by the other company for violating confidentiality. Good times. Story 35. I'm a bartender at a country club, and this one member is always an a-hole and just got under the skin of one of our servers so badly, who can't handle pressure well to begin with, that the server just said something along the lines of, "Eat a banana, you old duck." Storms behind my bar and on the Shiner beer tap, dunks his head under it, takes a few big gulps, and then just leaves, and I haven't heard from him since. Story 36. Oh, I want to toss my own hat in. I worked at a bowling alley. On this day, I was coming in to work my normal 2-2 shift after the manager had been there solo since 8 a.m. As soon as she saw me, she told me to check a memo that had been posted. It said, "Males are no longer allowed to wear jewelry." I chuckled a bit and looked at the line of 4 to 5 groups waiting, plus a birthday party. Then I took my work shirt off, tossed it on the counter, and asked for her to call me if things changed. The most satisfying part of that is she was left to close by herself and work 8 a.m., 2 a.m. Story 37. There's a problem at my job of people getting fired for the stupidest reasons. One white coworker remarked to another white coworker in front of a black supervisor, "Isn't it weird to be working with all these freaking black people?" One coworker used the company message system to call our boss a Karen without realizing that, surprise, the company message system is monitored. One coworker got drunk on a weeknight and decided to go into the office at 2 a.m. He tripped the office security system, and the police showed up to find him drunkenly stumbling around the building. We all got a mysterious email the next day reminding us not to go to the office between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. We only got the context a few days later. It's been months and no one seems to know what he was even trying to do there. Story 38. I work in a hotel restaurant. We had a bartender once who had been there for several years and was one of the best workers we had, and everyone liked him. Well, one day some of the other male coworkers and some of the customers started giving him a hard time after a girl gave him her room number. He was not interested, did not swing that way, but they pushed and pushed for him to go to her room. So when he got off work, he proceeded to get super drunk, then was eventually pressured to go to her room. He went to the room, knocked on the wrong room, proceeded to force his way in and pass out briefly on the bed, and was eventually convinced to leave after he regained some consciousness and was crying incoherently. He then proceeded down to the lobby, puked, and passed out again on a couch until the police arrived. And that is how my coworker was simultaneously arrested, fired, and banned from the premises. Story 39. This happened in a different department, so I am a bit sketchy on the details, but 2 people who were of opposite genders, but both gay, got fired for having experimental sex with one another in the parking lot while on the clock. They apparently just wanted to try it out to see what they were missing, and for some reason, couldn't hook up off after hours. Story 40. I work on a ship as an officer. Working on ships are very stressful at times, doing 12-hour 7 days for as long as your contract, which varies from 4 to 8 months, which may cause people's mood to vary very quickly. So this incident did not happen during my watch, my duty time. It goes like, the captain was in a good mood and pranked the officer on the watch. Soon after, the captain told the lookout at the bridge if you see any lights to inform him, as he had to reply email. This lookout tried get back at the cap too by calling the CAPT and saying there was a light, and when the CAPT asked him where, he pointed to the moon, saying, "There, that's the light." CAPT immediately kept quiet. When we reached the next port, the poor guy was sent home. Story 41. The craziest firing at my store was how I ended up becoming a manager. Newer manager at a different store in a not-so-pleasant area had actually been doing pretty well, until she came flying out of the back of house with blood pouring out her arm. Told her supervisor she had cut herself prepping food and proceeded to jump in her car to drive to the hospital. Too bad she was speeding and got pulled over by the cops. She finally admits to them she was shooting up heroin and the needle broke off in her arm. The cops made her go back to the store. The manager's office was covered in blood spray. It was over everything. The next day, the owner asked if I wanted to be a manager. That was the second time substances addicts had gotten me promoted. Story 42. About 10 years ago, first thing in the morning, the warehouse supervisor was talking to the third shift guys before they left. The third shift guys were all black. One of the first shift guys, who was Middle Eastern, not in the country for a long time and still had a thick accent, he goes up to the supervisor and says, "You want to hear a joke?" Supervisor says, "Yeah." Guy points to the black third shift guys one by one and says, "Black man, black man, black man." Honestly, I don't know if because of cultural differences he knew how offensive it was, or if he just thought it was harmless fun. Regardless, he was gone within a few minutes. Saw him working in a gas station a few months later. Story 43. Guy came into the office on a Saturday, sales office, so majority of employees work MF 9 to 5, with his girlfriend, and proceeded to have sexy times in one of the conference rooms. He didn't bother checking the floor, 36,000 Marn score, to see if anyone was here, and was caught and reported by another employee. According to story, he didn't have the door closed, and she was quite loud. I've been in the office over the weekend, work in it, and it's really quiet here, which means any noise is amplified. Corporate security came in the following business day and walked him out the door. Story 44. I had a classmate, Mark, in high school. We would have been around 14, 15 years old. We were in dummy maths, and mid-class we noticed him standing up looking directly at the teacher, Mrs. Early, who was sitting at her desk at the front of the room facing the class. The teacher noticed the commotion the class was making with everyone whispering and talking about Mark standing up looking weird. She told him to take his seat, to which he stuck his finger up at her and replied, "Eat crap, Mrs. Early," then walked over to the window and climbed outside. Mind you, we were on the second floor. The class went bonkers. He jumps and runs off across an open field, flashing his eyes. I never saw him again.